Welcome everybody to the grand finale of our Excellence in Aviation Safety Week. It's been a very extraordinary week for us to promote excellence in aviation safety. We have presented a number of awards. We have heard from a remarkable lineup of speakers, a lineup that has included squadron commanders, space shuttle astronauts, demonstration pilots, experts from a wide variety of fields, and of course, a couple of Hall of Famers along the way. So that probably raises the question, where do you go for a grand finale? Well, we have the answer to that. We have brought in our nation's top authority on transportation safety, Robert Sumwalt, the chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. Robert has over 32 years as a professional pilot. He flew for Piedmont and U.S. Airways. We got to know him quite well when he was representing the SCANA Flight Department and had an opportunity to serve on NBAA's safety committee. Robert has a remarkable background. He has a master's from Embry-Riddle, where he specialized in safety systems and applied human factors, and has just a remarkable history and expertise in safety. And we have been fortunate that he has been a member of the NTSB since 2006 and the chair since 2017. He is a great professional, and I'm pleased he's also a personal friend. Robert, welcome to NBAA's National Safety Forum.
Yeah, thank you very much for that gracious introduction, and I'm thrilled to be here. So good afternoon to everyone. Ed, I really appreciate that the NBAA didn't just throw in the towel and use COVID as an excuse not to have the National Safety Forum. It's been a success over the years, and I'm thrilled that you're able to do it again, this time virtually, but the fact that it was virtual has not diminished the quality. So Ed and Doug and Mark and Alex and Phil, all of the NBAA staff who has been behind putting this together, great job. And to the presenters, Greg, Daniel, Matt, Quay, Jeff, great job. I think the topic of this year's forum is one of critical importance. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world these days. So it's good to be reminded of keeping ourselves fit for duty and fit for life. The presentations over the past few days have been exceptionally informative. As Quay pointed out in the previous hour, of the 10 items on the NTSB's most wanted list, four are directly related to ensuring that transportation workers are of sound mind, body, and soul. Basically, being fit for duties. And those four, as Quay went through, reduce distractions, reduce fatigue-related accidents, end alcohol and drug impairment, and require medical fitness, which includes screening for obstructive sleep apnea. Certainly, I'm not going to get into all of these. I think that Quay and Daniel did a really nice job of discussing them. But I do want to comment on two of them, and that would be one dealing with drug impairment and the other dealing with distractions. Quay did mention that in 2014, the NTSB conducted a study where we looked at drugs in the systems of pilots who were fatally injured in plane crashes. And as Quay mentioned, in March, in fact, one day before the pandemic was officially declared, on March the 10th, we released a study that we had conducted. We basically updated the 2014 study. And the bottom line is that the prevalence of drugs found in the bodies of fatally injured pilots has continued to increase since the 2014 study. Now, when I mention drugs, we think of illegal drugs oftentimes, but in this case, when we talk about drugs, we're talking about prescription drugs, over-the-counter drugs, and yes, illicit drugs. The updated study looked at the tox results of 952 pilots who were killed in aviation accidents between the years of 2013 and 2017. Now, I will show a few graphs in just a moment, but before I do that, a couple of things I'd like to comment on. About half of the pilots, 48%, so about half of the pilots either held an ATP or a commercial pilot certificate. Now, granted, just because they held these certificates does not necessarily mean that they were operating in business aviation. All we really know is the type of operation in which the flights were conducted. Part 91, Part 121, Part 135. So we don't know exactly whether or not these were, how many were business aviation related. Another thing I want to point out is just a point that I made a few minutes ago, and that is when we say drugs, not all of the detected drugs were illicit drugs, and not all of them were potentially impairing drugs, but some were. Sedating antihistamines, things such as Benadryl, over-the-counter cold and allergy medications. As Quay said, diphenhydramine continues to be the most common category of potentially impairing drugs found in these studies. Another thing is that sedating pain relievers, a category that includes opioids, was the second most common category of potentially impairing drugs. That was found in about 5.3% of the pilots. And of the 50 pilots who did test positive for sedating pain relievers, 46 were positive for at least one opioid. So I'm going to show a couple of slides here, just two of them. Now the yellow line, the yellow dash line, the vertical yellow dash line, anything prior to that was found in the 2014 study that Quay talked about. Anything to the right of that dashed vertical line is in the 2017, or is in the updated study. And notice on the blue line, we used to say when we referenced the 2014 study that in 1990, the incidence of fatally injured pilots having at least one drug in their system was 10%, but by 2012, that had increased to 40%. And look how that trend has continued. It's up to nearly 50% of the fatally injured pilots, the 952 pilots that were fatally injured between 2013 and 2017. About half of them had one drug in their system. Now, if you look at the red line there, that means that more than one positive drug finding, more than one drug, and the green line, more than two. So I'm going to flip over to one other slide. This would show, let me move my little thing out of the way here. The red line would show, let me pull it up so I can see it better, would show potentially impairing drugs. And look what that line's looking like. So about 28% of the fatally injured pilots between 2013 and 2017 had a potentially impairing drug in their system. Now, we're not able to draw a causal analysis between the potential impairing drug and the crash, but it is a significant finding. The green line, the underlying condition that they likely had, the potentially impairing condition. Now it gets really concerning when you get down here into the purple and the blue line. That is controlled substances. And as Quay pointed out, those are not allowable for aviation, and illicit drugs, certainly not even allowable. And the most common of those, as you can imagine, would be marijuana. So I'm through with the slides. So that's all I'm going to show you there. So that's it in terms of the potentially between drug and alcohol impairment that's on our most wanted list that I wanted to talk about. I want to circle back to one other issue, and that would be distractions. Obviously, there are a lot of distractions in the world these days. In the cockpit, you've got a lot of distractions, potential distractions. And I'm not going to talk about those because you're all familiar with those, and hopefully you're able to deal with those. The things that I want to talk about now are the distractions that occur once we close the aircraft door, close up the hangar, and we get into our car. Because how many people want to pick up the telephone and make a phone call to say, hey, I'm home. I'll be, we're back on the ground. I'll be home in 20 minutes, or check voicemail, or send a quick text message. This month, October, has been designated by the National Safety Council as Distracted Driving Awareness Month. And I tell you, I've met with a lot of families of survivors who their loved ones have been killed by distracted drivers. Put the phone down and drive. Because we're all careful when it comes to flying airplanes. But we start picking up the phone and talking when we get into the car. We have at the NTSB, we have a policy that we will not talk on the phone while we're driving or text, and it's one that I do adhere to. Let me switch topics now. I think it's fair to say that aviation professionals have a can-do oriented, and I'll say that I'll be willing to bet that most of us are just a teeny bit type A, right? That's a trait that can help us, but it's a trait that can also work against us. And if you're like me, you really don't want to pick up the phone and ask for help, whether we're calling for mental health counseling, whether we're calling for family counseling, whether we're calling about physical ailments. A few years ago, I had noticed that I'd been having some pains up in my shoulder, left shoulder, and down into my arm. And we know that that's not a good thing. And I told my wife about it. And she said, well, you've got to have that looked at. And she told me exactly what I needed to know. But I said to her, well, you're right. But I'm not going to call. If you'll call and make an appointment, I'll go. And that's the way I think a lot of us are. We don't want to be the one to pick up the phone and make that call for help. So she did call. They got me in that day. My physician sent me to a cardiologist. I even had a catheterization. And the good thing is that everything was good. The cardiologist got to build a swimming pool because of the extra procedure he did on that Friday afternoon. But the fact is it's difficult for us to pick up the phone. There are resources out there. We just need to ask. One of the benefits that I had when I was flying for an airline is that we had something that we call the ALPA Air Medical Office. And you could pick up the phone and call and talk to a physician. If you had health-related concerns, it was completely confidential. They wanted to make sure that you had the information to make the proper decision about how you would deal with this health concern of yours. And if you got your medical certificate was in jeopardy, they were there to help you get it back. They knew the system, and they were professionals. When I left the airline and became the head of a small business aviation department, I really missed that service. But one year I was attending what used to be called CAS, Corporate Aviation Safety Seminar, now called BAS, Business Aviation Safety Summit. I learned that there was such a service available for business aviation operators. In fact, it was the same physicians that offered that service for ALPA. So we signed up for that device, for that service. The good thing is that they would take a credit card. I just gave them the credit card. I'm sure our HR folks would have had a cow to know that I was providing a benefit that the rest of the 5,300 employees of that company did not have. But I'm glad we did that, because later soon after we signed up for the service, we had a pilot who had a medical issue. He had actually lost his medical. And through this service, they were able to cut through, first of all, make sure the pilot got the right treatment. He did. And once he had been treated, this company was there to help the pilot get his medical back as quickly as possible. So it is a service that I'm glad we took advantage of. There are professional services out there that can help business aviation professionals. But I also believe in the importance of peer support programs. Back in the early 90s, I met Mimi Tompkins. As you'll recall, Mimi was the co-pilot in the Aloha 243 event, where the 18 feet of the roof peeled off at 23,000 feet. A flight attendant was lost. And Mimi explained how her life had changed for the worse after that event. They had gone to the White House and met the president. They were heroes, but her life had just taken a downward spiral. So Mimi, Alan Campbell from Delta, and I put together a critical incident response program. The program at ALPA has been up and running for, 26 years now, and it's more successful than ever. The point is that I learned the value of peer support programs, whereby the peers can help us deal with events, critical events in our lives. So that's an example of a peer support program. Another is that, Matt gave an excellent presentation yesterday about mental health issues with some pretty telling statistics. And the chances are, if someone is having trouble at home, there's a pretty good chance that those troubles can spill over into the workplace. And so, again, when I was with the airline, we had a very effective professional standards program. It was a peer-to-peer program to help pilots deal with the outward effects of behavioral issues. And the real premise behind it is that if someone is having problems, safety can be compromised. So my question is something like this something that NBAA would be interesting in considering establishing? It's a rhetorical question. So in wrapping it up, let me leave you with this. We're all humans, and humans from time to time have issues, whether it's issues with mind, body, or soul. So there are resources available. And my rhetorical question to leave you with is, are you doing enough to provide these resources to your employers, to your employees? Thank you, and be safe. Thanks for having me.
Well, Robert, thank you very much for your always thoughtful insights. I think your charts certainly are attention grabbing, and I think it underscores how important it is that our community do things like spend a week and bring experts together and have a chance to really understand and talk about the issues at hand. And certainly that's what this week has been about. What this National Safety Forum has been about. And I'm grateful that you have not only just showed up this afternoon to speak, but you have listened to what is being said. You've asked a lot of questions today and in preparation for this. And I'm excited that I know you're going to stay on and listen to our follow-up panel where we are going to bring back Daniel and Matt and Quay and allow Greg to talk with them. And this afternoon, they're going to be talking about kind of creating a supportive organizational and SMS structure. We're going to bring it all together on what we're talking about and see how we can create these support networks and make sure that our organizations have the processes and the people in place to address the things we've talked about. So, Robert, we're excited that you're going to continue to listen in. Greg, I'm going to turn it over to you and the panel to follow up from here.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Thank you, Robert. I can always listen to you speak for hours on end, but let's get into some questions. But I have a few things that I want to say in my slide deck, but I do want to come back to a couple things that Robert brought up. you know, the one is, to his point of safety doesn't start and stop at the hangar door. It goes on. And I've been speaking about fatigue for a very long time. And as my kids will attest, I go home and make them go to bed with the same vigor that I make sure that I have sleep on my flights. And I tell them that it's just as important. And if they have questions, I have people that they can talk to, such as Daniel and Quay, to explain why sleep is so important. But they just say, never mind, I'll go to bed, Dad. The other thing is, you know, when we're talking about the safety in the skies, you know, I think the statistics that Robert shared were very telling. And, you know, it gets into, a lot of times I think we blur the lines and we say, well, these are small general aviation pilots, or this isn't business aviation, or this is the airlines. We all share that sky, and it's a very small piece of sky, especially when we're all funneling into an airport. I think most of us have flown, and to be turning final at an uncontrolled airport and realize very closely that you're sharing the sky with somebody else. So this is a very important topic that we carry not just beyond or not within our flight department, whether it's a single pilot operation or a large corporate flight department, but we carry it out. So with that being said, I'm going to get into just a couple quick slides on optimizing your personal performance and creating a support. I haven't had much to say, so I have to figure out how to navigate these slides. All right, it did work. So the three things that we're going to bring up is the three things you can do from this point forward in 38 minutes is you can go back and discuss what we've talked about this week, whether it's the individual sessions or what we're getting ready to lay out. And then I encourage you to have a plan from having been involved in emergency medicine for a very long time and at a flight department, having something unfold at your door and not having a plan for it is a very bad time to be trying to figure out what to do at that point. Ask these questions, drill the questions. And then next thing we're going to get into is having a system, and I'll tell you what that system is. So discuss, take these topics back. You've heard from us on the 12th. These are all going to be available, and they can put the link back over here and take these conversations and these recordings back to your flight department or your executive, or share them with your friends and families that also fly, and use this information. We do have a fitness for duty policy statement that really kind of takes everything that we've talked about and goes beyond just fatigue. It talks about fitness for duty, medical and mental health, and substance abuse. And it doesn't delineate between pilot and dispatcher. Everybody that has their hand in that jar is protected under that general fitness for duty policy statement. And then include other stakeholders. You know, talk to occupational health, talk to HR. Our OC Health and HR departments are very familiar with Dr. Snyder. They know him as Quay because we interact with them very often. So bring these conversations outside of your department. So with that, how do you plan? Well, ask yourself, I mean, what do you do if certain scenarios are going to play out? What do you do? So if you're looking at fatigue, how is it currently measured? I mean, is it consistent? Is it quantitative? I mean, before we used a biomathematical tool to measure fatigue, you know, how we were crewing, whether we were doing augmented crews or long duty day extensions, it was kind of subjective and it wasn't consistent. And by using a fatigue risk management plan, it became more quantitative and repeatable. And then how would you support a pilot or staff member that needed time off for a medical or personal issue? So, and then who's qualified to make that decision as to whether they return? I mean, a medical side is a little different. We can send them and say, hey, go get a first-class medical and take care of that. But what do you do on the personal issues? If somebody has lost a family member, if somebody's going through a divorce, who makes that decision? The person that's in the concern? It'd be easier to have a process, and that's what we're going to get into. So have a system, and that's our SMS. I like to turn the words around quite frequently, and we call it an SMS. We say safety management system, but really, if you flip the words around, I think it conveys the importance of what we're saying when we just talk SMS. It's a system that effectively manages known safety risks. We know fatigue is a contributing factor. We know from Matt's presentation that 20% of the aviation population has or will have a mental health issue at some point. 20%. I mean, if we knew that there was a 20% chance that somebody was going to have a heart attack walking in that door, we would probably have an ambulance standing by. So what can we do on the mental health side? Well, Matt kind of talked a little bit about it. Daniel talked about how fatigue can change behavior. Now, instead of just measuring performance-based indicators, such as which we see in the safety management system, such as ASAPs and CFOCAL reports, now let's come up with behavioral and reliability indicators. When someone has a change in their behavior and it's unexpected, unexplained, something is going on. Maybe it's they're not getting sleep. Maybe they have an undiagnosed medical problem. Maybe they're having problems at home, but we're seeing the tip of the iceberg, and we need to get them into, instead of it being a disciplinary action, let's pull them into the SMS and get them the help and support they need. The same thing with changes in reliability, whether it's somebody, I think even Daniel talked about, and Matt for sure, on reliability, right? So all of a sudden we get more sick calls. Somebody's calling off. They're being late for work. They're not as dependable as they used to be. They were a great employee at one point, but something has changed. We have the tip of the iceberg and we can't ignore it. And that's where having what we've been partnering with Matt to develop is a flight department dedicated assistance program. And essentially an EAP and coaching program to help get these people that are, on Matt's sliding scale of 1 to 10, this is the intervention at 4 and 5 before it becomes a problem, and help them to develop their resources and their self, such as stopping the storytelling and becoming resource to help them cope and deal with things. Now we get into airman certification. I've done lots of flight physicals, and everybody in this room probably at some point is very familiar with this process. It's go to the doctor, answer the questions, and just be quiet. And that's just not good. I've been a proponent. I've been in emergency medicine for a very long time. But I've been there. I've been going to the doctor and been like, man, I wish I could ask this, but I'm kind of scared to, but I'll just ask it anyway. But we have to have, the department needs to support more robust flight physicals. And not only that, like I use the Mayo Pro pilot program. We've been involved with Dr. Schneider's Aviation Medical Advisory, which can help with airman certification. But the other thing is your pilots and staff need to feel comfortable if they do have a medical issue as to what that road's going to look like moving forward in the interim till they get their medical back. And I'm sure Quay can talk to you that early diagnosis is the key in a lot of things to getting your medical back. I'll be honest, a couple years ago, I had a high blood pressure problem and I was scared. I thought my days were over, but it became to the point where I had to do something. And once I went and I actually got the help, and I went to the Mayo to make sure everything was done correctly, and I worked with AMAS to make sure all the bases were covered, I felt so much better that I know now that I'm healthy and I'm not going to be in some a foreign country somewhere with a medical problem and my kids are going to be scared to death. So it's important to be very proactive in these, and the safety management system can help be proactive and advocate for these services. With that being said, I know I've talked about a lot, but I'd like for us to get into the panel. We have about 30 minutes. So ask questions. I've got a terrific staff here of great experts. But I'm going to go right to Daniel here. We're going to kind of, without questions, and I'm going to make up questions. So Daniel, one of the things that we talked about is fatigue risk management plan. But we're moving forward in time, new technologies, new evidence, new research is being done. And now we've got enough to we can move into what we're calling a performance-based fatigue risk management plan. Can you talk a little bit about that and how a department can help facilitate that? Daniel, I think you're muted.
Thanks, Greg. Absolutely. So performance-based scheduling or performance-based fatigue risk management really extends from where the maturity of the fatigue risk management program, when we start out, we have prescriptive limits, and these often take the form of hours of service limits. You can only work or fly a certain number of hours in a day, because if you extend the time that you're on duty or flying beyond a certain number of hours, the risk that you'll become fatigued goes up. Does that mean that if you have a long day, you are certainly fatigued? Absolutely not. It has a lot to do with what's going on with your individual schedule. What was your previous day like? What was your sleep like? And so in that regard, if you start to measure these things directly, not only do you ensure safety, but it opens up opportunities to provide more flexibility to the operation. If you can verify and be assured that you are safe and alert, then it stands to reason that you should be able to extend the time that you're working and extend the time that you're flying in a safe, measured, systematic way. And that's what strategic fatigue risk management or performance-based fatigue risk management is all about.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Matt, let's go into how moving behavioral indicators and reliability indicators into a safety management. I mean, historically, someone has a change in behavior and they're just kind of not pleasant to be around or start showing up late. That's just disciplinary action. But now we're saying, hey, there probably is something else going on here, and let's get that fixed. And so we can move them into these flight department dedicated assistance programs.
Yeah, at the airlines, the professional standards has been a great, tactical resource to capture some of these events. I think it's where normally the chiefs have to figure out discipline. It's actually easier to go to professional standards, get some mediation, see if it can't be worked out. Unfortunately, with flight departments, they're really small. And so maybe having peer support there's some challenges with that. But these issues are typically, at Pro Stands, we call them the frequent flyers. They're just always in there. It's the bid avoid list people at the airlines. I mean, those are not normal. There's abnormality with that. When somebody just can't get along with somebody, there could be personality issues, but especially if there's a change, that's low-hanging fruit to be able to go in and proactively, non-punitively intervene and check out what's going on and offer a hand. So, but yeah, these issues, these behavioral issues are not, they're traceable. We can see where they come from. They become known. And so I think that's a great early intervention opportunity.
And one of the things that we talked about in the conversation yesterday, we had a question about somebody asking about what they could do to help a coworker. And I think, you made reference to, in the business community, flight departments are small, and we know people, and having a true peer-based system is really difficult. But what we could leverage is peer education. Right. So now we're kind of blending the two of what the airline had, which was a peer-based system that was anonymous. But now you're kind of saying, well, we can't really do that here, but we can train your peers to help you get into and make that phone call and help them to coach you to get into resource states to where you're getting help.
Yeah. The easiest great example of this is suicide awareness training. They've done it from small groups to entire cities. Like QPR Institute is a leader in suicide awareness. They've conducted huge funded studies on this. And when you train a community, whether it's large based or a flight department, you get everybody on the same page. And that's how you get a movement towards, and that's how you can create an initiative. So I think the easiest way is just train everybody up on what wellness looks like and ways to intervene, how to have that conversation. CIRP is about how to ask and introduce those kinds of conversations. These are trainable skills. And I think when you do it as an organization, it starts to move the needle and it becomes easier on the individual level.
Yeah, thank you. Quay, I've got a question here, and you've helped a lot of people navigate the process to getting medical certification back. And the question is how can we pitch these programs, you know, to our accountable executives? Cost is an issue, and it's an issue even as a flight manager myself. But from a department that we have these programs, and we've been through several scenarios of all kinds of stuff. The cost of having the programs, it pales in comparison to having a pilot out for a year. It pales in, and even with our fatigue, I could run the pilots harder under Daniel's using Daniel's program. But so we kind of bridge the gap of using fatigue, and then going with, you know, we kind of split the difference between, hey, the fatigue program says you could do this, but the legacy system says, no, you need a couple of days off after being gone for a while. And then the same with you know, somebody who we let that sliding scale that Matt talked about progress all the way through that 5, and they're spiraling into the true fitness for duty evaluation involving the FAA. The cost on just one pilot having to go through that process would pay for these programs for years. So you have a lot of experience with helping pilots get back. You want to talk about the kind of the cost benefit of the programs?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, Greg, I would say that you're probably the world's most articulate and persuasive spokesperson for this program. So
appreciate that.
We could hire you to come out and do that. But, you know, I want to put this in the context of COVID right now. One of my degrees is in public health, and public health is analogous to safety. We're trying to protect the health of people. We're trying to protect the safety of our operators. But the value of that is not really recognized until there's a crisis. And then we retroactively look at what could we have done to prevent this crisis from exploding to what it is right now. We could have intervened early. We could have had structures in place to assist people who need this. And before it becomes a big deal, we could step in and evaluate people. We're seeing it in COVID right now, but we've seen it in safety for years and years too. And so for a minuscule investment in having protections in place that, one, allow pilots and every member of the flight department to feel free to reach out and protect their health, number one, because without your health, everything else goes by the wayside. Your performance goes down, but your longevity goes down, your quality of life goes down. So as Chairman Sumwalt said right at the very beginning, we need to protect and enhance people's personal health. And then the medical issues and the certification issues will follow. All of us as pilots, as you said earlier, Greg, we go in for the physical and, you know, we just check no to all the blocks and the questions, and we want to get our medical and leave. In my world, we call that the McDonald AME. I'll order a first-class medical certificate with a side of fries in door 1 and pick it up in door 2 by not talking about things. If you can't talk to your AME about medical issues you have, you should separate your AME and your primary care physician or your specialist. And you should have the confidence that your company has policies and procedures in place so that if you have a medical issue, that you can ask for help for that, and you know you have job protection while that's being evaluated, because the job protection is essential part of the safety management system. Without that, no one's going to come forward and reveal conditions. It's just like Robert talked about the critical incident response program, the peer support program. All of these are very, very important that break down the barriers that pilots are reluctant to seek help for. So if we can break down those barriers and provide just a little bit of coverage for a trivial amount of cash, we really are enhancing the safety system and preventing disasters from occurring later. And hopefully they'll never occur, but the cost of having one is just astronomical. And for some companies and businesses, it's existential. They cease to exist if an unfortunate event like this occurs.
I know I like to have my costs planned and budgeted. And having these programs gives me a little bit more, okay, it's going to cost this much for the year, as opposed to when you have a unknown path going down of a pilot on a medical or having problems at home and they're off and you don't know when they're coming back. the burden on that, but to know that you have solid processes and moving it into, to your point of putting it, giving some assurance is the SMS. The SMS is a non-punitive process. So there shouldn't be a punitive repercussion from going to your AME and asking and getting a quality flight physical and making sure you are healthy to be in that airplane. So I do, you kind of alluded to, and Robert said fit for life earlier, and I thought, gosh, that's a great next topic. But I do want to go back. We do have a question, and it's directed to you, Mr. Sumwalt, and I think it kind of goes into some of the other areas that you and I talked about even on our pre-session talk. Percentage of drug chart, presence of a drug doesn't necessarily indicate causal factor. So, but this can be said too for even fatigue and distraction. And that's some of the things that we talked about is they're contributing factors, but it's kind of we don't know because these were on board and we know that they cause problems. So can you talk a little bit about specifically answering the question on the drug chart, but also let's hit the topics on fatigue and distraction due to mental health issues.
Yeah, it's a great question. And Greg, thank you. And to whomever posed the question, thank you. We want to be very deliberate that we're not just saying, oh, this person had a drug in their system, so therefore that caused the accident. We want to actually see how it affected their behavior. And it's the same thing with fatigue. Most people, if you ask them, they will tell you that the Colgan Air crash was a fatigue-related accident. But I argued in the board meeting that, no, we can't prove that. We knew that they were fatigued, but we also said that the degree to which fatigue affected their performance could not be determined. And so we want to have a very specific relationship between what we found and a decrement of performance. And sometimes that's hard to do. So I can't say that just because people had drugs in their system that led to the accident. So we're looking for those sorts of behavioral markers. Like we could say, well, there was slurred speech, or with alcohol, it's pretty easy. We had a train wreck, literally a train wreck that we deliberated about 3 weeks ago, and the locomotive engineer had we figured had a blood alcohol concentration at the time of the collision of about 0.3, not 0.03, 0.3, compared to legal drinking BAC would be 0.08. So he had almost 4 times legal for driving a car. So, in that case, we could say, well, there was a performance decrement. But I didn't answer that too well. But the fact is, it's hard to show that causal relationship sometimes.
It is, but we know that it degraded performance. We know, but to the extent that it caused the accident, we don't know. But it's kind of just don't have your hand in the cookie jar and no one can accuse you of eating the cookies, right? It's what you got caught with at the time.
That's right. And that's why we say we label it as potentially impairing drugs. Okay.
And Greg, I'd like to add, relative to whether we can prove in an individual instant whether fatigue or a drug has a direct impact on the accident time and sequence of events is one thing. But when we look at multiple incidents in aggregate, sometimes it becomes very clear about fatigue or a drug or another factor as a causal factor. We just completed the largest study ever conducted on aviation maintenance engineers, AMTs. And we looked at 17,800,000 AMT work hours, and we looked at injury rates, and we rated the work shift that they were working on as a normal shift or a high fatigue risk shift if the hours of work and the way that the work shift happened suggested there were high fatigue risk factors, and the injury rates on those shifts were 27 times higher than normal shifts. And when you see something like double, that's a big deal. But when you see something like 27 times, 2,700% increase in the risk of injuring yourself if your shift is a high risk fatigue shift, that's on any individual instance isn't smoking gun direct evidence, but that's such a strong signal. It makes a very strong case for systematic fatigue risk management, or in the case of drinking and driving or other factors. It just makes a strong case in general.
Yeah. 27 times is not, well, is there a correlation? I don't know.
It's literally off the charts.
And then, so we've talked mental health, we've talked substance abuse, and Matt, I'm going to throw this one to you. They're really one and the same. I mean, not that statement, but substance abuse can be a mental health, or is most likely a mental health in origin. Self-medication.
Yeah, what's the horse and what's the cart? I mean, substance abuse oftentimes is a strategy to use to mitigate the underlying mental health condition. But then conversely, when there's substance use involved, it creates mental health conditions. Mm-hmm. So it just starts chasing itself around and around.
Okay. So going back to the increase in drug use, this is a question from the audience. What do we think maybe the reason is? Is it an aging population, an ease of getting over the counter? One thing I always thought for the increase in diphenhydramine is the planes and the missions have flown a little bit different. I mean, sleep is kind of gone into I must sleep now, and I will take Benadryl to help me do that. But that's the wrong action. So is there any indication as to what's maybe leading this change?
Quay, I'm going to direct it to you for your professional opinion, but our staff felt like it's indicative and reflective of the overall increase in drug use within the population. I know that now I've eaten too many of those hamburgers that Quay mentioned that we shouldn't be eating, and so I take everyday cholesterol medication. I didn't have to take that 10 years ago. Quay, what do you think? What do you think is the reason for the increase in the prevalence of drugs?
I think it's a combination of factors. If we look at the slides that I showed in the previous hour from the initial NTSB safety study, what you saw was two different patterns. You saw the illicit drugs that you referred to, Robert, your cocaine, heroin, marijuana, etc., decreasing as the pilot population ages, and that reflects what the general population does too. We see lower uses in older age cohorts. But the use of impairing medications, or particularly those for potentially impairing conditions that reflect, tends to go up as you get with older age cohorts. And I believe it's really an education problem. Physicians are driven to see patients as quickly as they can, and it's easy to prescribe a medication and get the person out the door and see the next person that's stacking up, rather than talking with the individual about health. And the NTSB is doing a fantastic job by keeping it on the top 10 list of most wanted items, that medications can impair people. And a lot of people are innocently ignorant about that. They just don't know the tremendous deleterious effects of something as simple as diphenhydramine, Benadryl. And as was said earlier, Matt, you talked about people using that for sleep as a quick solution. It's a terrible solution, just as a lot of the sedative hypnotics, such as the Ambien, etc. That undermines everything and contributes to addiction, and is used in a way like alcohol to mitigate some of the personal stressors. And if people would address these, then we could see drops in the level of these medications. But really, what the Safety Forum is doing, what the NTSB is doing, it's an education process. And once we make people aware, I don't think they're going to intentionally participate in safety-sensitive activities while they know they're impaired.
Okay,
thank you both.
Greg, can I just add one thing?
Absolutely.
I would say probably 90% of clients that I have, sleep is a problem for them. And certainly, there's lots of studies that they're coming out now with kids that are having sleep disorders. People have said part of it is what Robert had talked about in the beginning, is we're so plugged in and stimulated that I think it's really hard for us to come to kind of de-escalate things on a daily basis to be able to get sleep. And you know, Daniel can talk more about this, but just getting devices off the table is a great sleep mitigation, you know, tactic. But a lot of guys that it's just like getting them to turn off the amount of connectivity. You don't have to take the Benadryl now to be able to get your sleep when you get to the hotel. Just unplugging is really difficult. And that's just not the direction as a culture that we're trying to get more plugged in, checking Facebook and texting and all these means of communicating. So,
well, on those lines, what Matt or Daniel talked about was the kind of the pre-sleep etiquette or the plan. And you know, I'm connected. I mean, my phone never turns off. But there is a time at which I don't check text messages. I don't care what's going on in email. And so I do have this routine, and it doesn't take long to put the device down and be like, hey, you know what? Actually, it's not that bad. But having that to learn how to sleep now is the cues, the Pavlovian response that Daniel talked about to, hey, guess what? My body recognizes that I just turned off the bright lights in the house. The TV went off. The night lamp turned on. I've got my book out I'm reading the limitations on the aircraft, or I'm going to read all about human factors or something. But your body's now got these cues, and it doesn't take long for your body to go, we're going to bed. I mean, 15 minutes, I think, your body can get really conditioned to this is the process to go to sleep, to help that latency. So it's just, we have to make sleep a priority. I mean, and that's what we need to do moving forward. I got to go into a couple other questions. You know, Robert, I just want to make one comment. You talked about a train accident, and I just listened to a presentation internally a couple weeks ago, and they were talking about how we move forward in this day and age is we have to look laterally. We can't just look at our individual industry. We have to look what's going on around us, because those are cues as to what may be going on in front of us in the future moving forward. The question here it's a very big question. I mean, it's a long question, but I mean, it's a big topic, and it's dealing with, I think, because I'm trying to keep eye contact here, regulatory oversight and driving of fatigue risk management programs. Also industry kind of standards, and you know, some operators are feeling that they maybe can't do this until it's an industry requirement. I would imagine maybe that's in a Part 91 operation. So what do we do? I think looking to the industry. I mean, well, the industry, just because you don't do it and there's no regulation, doesn't necessarily absolve you to industry standard. And the other is the insurance companies. The aviation insurance industry is getting very tight, and it's going to be all the safety programs that you have in place are going to help you to look to your insurance companies and ask them. You know, our insurance company helps to support these programs. So anybody, Robert, I know Daniel, you work with insurance companies on they're helping say, hey, let's go come up with a fatigue program. So the industry can help you with this. Anybody? Open it up. Robert, Daniel, anybody have any?
Well, go ahead.
I'll comment briefly. I mean, the NBAA and the Flight Safety Foundation I believe it was 2014 when we were on the fatigue risk management committee, published some flight time and rest guidelines that are, although they don't have the power of a regulatory thing, they provide excellent guidelines. And that's another one too. But it's a 14-page document that I think really provides some great insight and can be used, even though it's guidance rather than regulatory. If insurance companies accept that, then that's fine. And I know from the aeromedical aspect as well as the fatigue, insurance companies look for programs that have, companies that have programs in place to mitigate those risks. So the insurance companies could be a driver for this.
Mm-hmm. And that's better than regulation because it allows you to have some flexibility.
Yeah, people are more willing to break regulations than they are to spend money.
That's too bad. That's amusing, but it is true. Daniel, you want to talk a little bit about this? We're
so
down to just a few minutes.
I have experience both in the regulatory motivating factors for fatigue risk management and in the insurance-based and financial-based motivating factors for fatigue risk management. And for Part 91 operators, in order to fly into Europe, you need certain qualifications with respect to SMS, whether it's through ISBAO or through the FAA SMS VP program. But within the context of SMS, you have to monitor and mitigate all hazards. And fatigue is a ubiquitous, pervasive, known hazard. And so if you are compliant with ISBAO, or if you are in the SMS VP program, and you're not managing fatigue, technically you're not in compliance there. So there is a regulatory or industry standard for managing fatigue. It's just that the oversight and enforcement of those nuances has been underwhelming to date, but they are there. With respect to the financial aspect, when you implement a safety management system, when you implement any safety program that impacts safety in a meaningful, measurable way, costs go down because you have fewer claims, whether it's a workers' compensation claim or an equipment damage claim or a catastrophic fatal hull loss scenario. And those cost savings are experienced in terms of risk, and that's how we pay our insurance premiums. And so anytime you can come up with a program where you can validate with quantitative information that you are buying down risk, those savings should show up in insurance premiums. And that's really an area where putting in place a quantitative objective framework for fatigue risk management has been an incredible motivating factor for both operators and insurance providers, because the savings are real, measurable, and experienced within months.
Thank you. And I saw Matt shaking his head there, because we have these conversations on mental health, right? It's something I talked about earlier. 20% of the aviation population, we know through that study by Harvard, is going to have a mental health issue. And the safety SMS requirement is to address known hazards and risks.
That's right.
Again, back to, if we knew 20% risk of somebody walking in the door with having a heart attack, we'd have an ambulance sitting here. So we need to address these things.
Yeah, and I would just add that reliability issues are one of the biggest costs to a carrier. So
thank you.
Yeah.
We're just about out of time. Does anybody have any real quick little snippets before we hand it over to Ed? Thank you. I would like to thank all of you, Robert, Matt, Daniel, Quay. As always, it's a pleasure for me to talk with you, and I appreciate your time and your dedication to this. Thank you very much. Ed?
Well, Greg, let me thank you. You've been a remarkable moderator for all of these panels, and I think this has been perhaps the most important national safety forum we've ever had, because it comes at a time when our industry is under stress and the people in it are under stress, are clearly operating in something other than VMC right now. And our way to get through that is by talking with each other, by sharing experiences, by sharing expertise. And you guys have done that remarkably well. Robert, what an honor it is for us to have the chair of the National Safety Transportation Board with us through this. Your leadership, as always, is magnificent. So again, let me thank this panel. And now I'm going to turn it over to NBAA's new chair of our safety committee. As I mentioned yesterday, Jeff Wofford is the chief pilot and aviation director at CommScope. He's had 13,000 hours of accident-free flying. He's type rated in several different business jets. But Jeff, thank you for taking the left seat at this important time, and we'll turn it over to you to close out our National Safety Forum.
Well, thank you very much, Ed. I do appreciate it. And Greg, My hat's off to you, for you and the entire team, for your Fit for Duty working group. You guys are phenomenal. As Mark, I think this has been one of the best national safety forums, because we are dealing with a lot of issues now that go toward worrying about fitness for duty. So, and Robert, as always, I appreciate everything you do for us and do for me. Greatly appreciated. So we're finishing up our NBAA Excellence in Aviation Safety Week, and I mean, it's been a phenomenal week. We started out with a single pilot safety stand down, and then I think it's one of the best ones we've had. This Chris Provencio and the single pilot working group absolutely knocked it out of the ballpark. And I want to thank all the participants. So on Monday, Ed kicked everything off, and then Todd Hodis and Tom Huff talked to us about Quest for Mastery, how we can go from novice to master, and things we can do to make sure we have continuous improvement throughout our career. And then on Monday afternoon, we learned about how to deal with ambiguous cockpit indications. Chris Provencio and the Cessna Jet Pilots Association members, David Miller, Charlie Precourt, Tom Abood, and Neil Singer, really gave us some good things to look at, and how to interpret our instruments, what to do when we do get an ambiguous indication. And it was a lot of help. And I mean, it's stuff that applies to all of us, whether we're flying on a 182 or flying a Gulfstream or any kind of airplane. And then on Tuesday morning, on session 3, we learned about excellence on the approach. And so Chris introduced our CJP members again, and these guys used a great simulator presentation to show us the importance of having stabilized approach criteria and how we need to be prepared to go around. If things don't look right, let's not press it. Let's go around and try again. It's discretion is the better part of valor. And then Tuesday afternoon, we had Todd Simmons with Cirrus. And, he did a really wonderful presentation. It was very professionally done. And, he talked about options for success. And then he related a very personal story about his accident. And so then what can we say about Wednesday with our safety town hall? So we discovered that business aviation has two new heroes. And this is something that's been a long time coming. And I'm tickled to death we were able to roll out, this new award for above and beyond performance. And so we recognized Gerald Down and Bruce Monnier. And then we got to listen to their story about how they handled that. And then to have John and Martha King and Richard McSpadden, and then Miles O'Brien as part of that panel. I mean, for an entire hour, we talked about that, and it was a very animated conversation. And I think everybody had a good time with it. And so then yesterday we kicked off the National Safety Forum, and with the NBA Dr. Tony Kern Professionalism in Aviation Award. And we actually ended up with Tony giving us a short message at the end of it. This award is something that means a lot to me personally. We were involved in getting that started several years ago. And I think recognizing people to do things the right way is extremely important. So then we moved into the NSF program. And as I said, Greg, you knocked it out of the ballpark. Your committee or your working group did a great job. So Daniel started out talking to us about how to optimize sleep. Something sometimes we take for granted. But you spend any time in a pilot lounge and you either hear snoring or people trying to go to sleep. So sleep is something we deal with or have to deal with. And then I tell you what, Matt, your talk yesterday afternoon really struck home. I think over the years as a director of this flight department, I've had several times where we've had to intervene or at least going to try to help somebody. And I think that identifying mental health is something extremely important that we have to look at and that we have to learn to mitigate is essential. It's something that's been put aside far too long. And I think the thing we discovered yesterday is, hey, we're not Supermen. We can't pull our shirt back and have the big S there. We are human beings as much as we hate to admit it. And we require sleep. We require good food. We require the proper food, quite. We require water, but more than anything, the rest of this is moot if we don't take care of ourselves mentally. And tomorrow is National Mental Health Day. So I think this really came out at a good time. And so I think that we need to be more cognizant about paying attention to people around us. People don't just suddenly nuke out. There's things that lead up to it. And so, we need to be a little bit more empathic in the way we handle and pay attention to the people that are around us. If we start seeing problems, we need to step in early and get them help. As a aviation manager, it's important that I take the lead on that and do something so that none of my guys have issues. And we've all got to take that stance. Quay, as always, your presentation is always great. And like I said, just listen to what your mom said. And so, we all have aeromedical issues to deal with. And then we wrapped up with this panel, and again, having Chairman Sumwalt on the panel has been fantastic. I respect Robert more than anybody will ever know. He's one of the most genuine people I've ever met, and the same thing for the rest of that panel. Ed alluded to it briefly when talking about Greg. Greg is probably one of the most passionate leaders I've ever seen. He takes all this very seriously. And it's greatly appreciated. And then having you guys willing to spend this much time on this panel and putting these presentations together is extremely important. So I really appreciate it. And the idea of incorporating all this into an SMS program is phenomenal. So back to some statistics. Talked to Doug Carr yesterday and to Mark Larson. And so we've had well over 1,000 people registered this week. And then Doug told me that we had over 400 people registered from different top clubs, which is one of the things we've really been trying to go after lately. So I'm tickled to death about that. So over the week, as Ed mentioned earlier, we've had the NTSB chairman, an astronaut, a former Thunderbird, two legends in aviation, or a noted reporter, two doctors, and a host of SMEs, along with two new heroes. But before I finish, I really do want to recognize NBAA. As I think as Robert mentioned early on, it would have been really easy for the NBA just to pull the covers over their head in March and go, well, we'll see you guys when all this is over with. But the NBA has demonstrated this phenomenal leadership, putting on different virtual programs throughout the year. And then when the decision was made to cancel base as a face-to-face event, the idea of having this safety week came up. And the support we've had has just been phenomenal. So, Ed, I wanted to thank you personally. I really appreciate the support we've had from the NBA staff, whether it's Mark Larson, whether it's Phil, Alex, everybody's just been phenomenal. It's one of the most professional groups of people I've ever worked with. We're really fortunate to have that kind of support. And I would really be missing out if I didn't thank Tom Huff. So, I've been working with Tom Huff on this committee for several years. I've had the privilege of working with him as chairman, with him being chairman for the last 2 years, and his leadership has been phenomenal. So anyway, my hat's off to the NBAA. I appreciate all the efforts from the NBA Safety Committee, and I look forward to seeing what we can do over the next couple of years. Anyway, thank you very much. I wish everyone the best, and we look forward to Single Pilot Safety Stand Down and National Safety Forum next fall, hopefully face-to-face. We're going to look forward to putting some more virtual stuff out there over the next few months, but I hope everybody stays safe, take care of yourself, and pay attention to what's on the website. We're going to have some stuff coming out on the NBA website, the safety committee part of it. So thank you very much, Ed, and back over to you.
All right. Well, Jeff, thank you very much for recognizing the NBA staff and for the great work that they have done this week. Thank you for your leadership of the safety committee. I do want to remind everybody who has participated, all of our sessions have been recorded. So while we hope a number of people have had an opportunity to be with us this week, the fact that a lot of people may be busy, may be traveling, whatever the situation, the good news is we've got this recorded. The expertise is still available, and we're going to make sure that it's easy for you to access. So again, thank you to Jeff and the safety committee. Thank you to the NBA staff, and thank you for the entire business aviation community for making safety a core value of our industry. And thank you for helping us celebrate excellence in aviation safety. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks, Ed. As a reminder, this session, along with the other 8 sessions within NBA's Virtual Safety Week, have been recorded and will be made available this Monday, October 12th, at pathlms.com/NBAA. To our participants, we hope you enjoyed NBAA's Virtual Safety Week. Please keep an eye out for a brief survey that will allow us to further enhance your webinar experience. Thank you again for joining us and have a safe day.